Hey folks, wanted to ask Sweta what her thoughts on the movie were because we both watched it together here in quarantine. So first of all, start off with your overall thoughts. What did you think of Thappad?
Yeah, I thought Thappad was a really great movie. I think that it definitely brought to light a issue that a lot of people think is something simple and trivial. And I think in a lot of people's eyes, especially in the South Asian community, these sort of issues and storyline itself may not have seemed super problematic, or it may have seemed as though a simple problem in the South Asian, and just not just South Asian, but in the community in general, in the globe, has been blown out of proportion. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think from a personal standpoint, I was definitely able to relate to a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the sort of problems that were faced throughout the storyline. So I thought it was a really great movie. I thought it had, its ups and downs, and like any other movie, there are definitely areas of critique and improvement. But I think for the most part, it shed light on an issue that I don't think has been shed light in a movie in the Bollywood industry or Hollywood, honestly, that I've seen before that I'm aware of. So I think it did a great job of that. And then also, I think the acting was very, very relatable because a lot of the actors and actresses portrayed are new and upcoming. So it kind of gave them an opportunity to also shed light on this sort of cause and problem, and yeah, bring more awareness to the community.
That's awesome. To hear your thoughts, obviously. Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper into the situation. Now, the protagonist has to sort of go through these really, really tough moments, right? Thappad, which means slap, right? How does it get to that moment? Like, do we see this happening in real life? Like sometimes are women, and I'm not putting the onus on women, but are we not able to see some of those red flags? Like, have we been sort of trained to ignore the red flags sometimes?
Yeah, I think again, speaking from what I'm aware of and personal experience and just like what I know about this issue in general, is I think, as cliche as it sounds, I think love can make you blind. And I think sometimes when you love someone and you're in a committed relationship or you're married, and again, this is a very specific example I know can be played out in many different sort of like scenarios, but I'm just using the example of marriage, using the example of woman, just to talk for the purpose of talking about the movie. But I think that when you love someone, you're so blind. Against all of these red flags. So there could be so many red flags. It could be so obvious. In the movie, it's like there were so many times where I was like, "Wow, I see these red flags," but it's so real that the protagonist or the person themselves like don't realize it, no matter who tells them, and no matter how obvious it might be. So I think it was really interesting from a third person perspective, who obviously, like, we don't know the characters and we don't know the situation, like observing the whole sort of journey, and the whole story from the beginning to end. So yeah, I think to answer your question, I think love really makes people blind and ignore these red flags. And I think that there are certain sort of I guess expectations, or not, I don't want to use the word expectations, but there's sort of a lot of myths associated with the fact that when situations like this happen in reality, they happen, at home, at night, in the dark, and that's not true. They can happen in public, they can happen in front of people, they can happen at the most unexpected times, which I think is a huge thing that this story really points out, is like they can happen in the middle of the day, like, and it has nothing to do with social status. It has nothing to do with what culture you're a part of, what gender you are, what race you are, right? Like, I think this is something that anyone can face, and I think the story does a good job of showing that, that no matter what occupation you're in, no matter how long you've been married to someone, for example, something like this can still happen.
Yeah.
Somewhat okay.
I almost think though that there's some sort of irony that the director tries to put in, that the protagonist, she's gone to college herself. Her husband is also really well educated apparently and is working at a firm where he's looking for advancement, and you see like misogyny creeping up in those upper echelons too. I think like that irony also has to be called out. Like, even though people might be educated, they may still like internalize these feelings, right? That they may not even be fully conscious of, right? And it's so important to call out that implicit bias or those like red flags, right? So
Yeah.
totally in line with you there. And then just sort of more on the structural format of the movie. For me, this one was like very different. I don't know about you,
Hmm.
but the main event sort of happens in the first half, and
Hmm.
in the latter half we see like what comes as a result. It's almost like the climax was here and then the rest of the movie's like resolution. Did you enjoy that, or like how was it different? What did you think of it?
Yeah, I wouldn't, this is just my personal opinion. So I know everyone has their own opinions as far as the actual structure of the story and the climax goes, for example. But I think that for me, I personally felt like from a like a directional and critique standpoint, after the climax, it was kind of hard for me to pay attention, or it was just kind of like, okay, now what? Like this happened, and and I almost don't know if the climax should have happened at when it did happen, or if it should have been at a different point. So I think it was definitely a little bit confusing, and I think there were definitely moments where I like wasn't as captivated in terms of like trying to understand and listen. I also felt like it dragged on a lot of times after the climax, and it was like, okay, we get the point, like move on, like what are you gonna do about this, like what's the story here, what's the message? So I feel like from a storytelling perspective, the message was a little bit unclear. It was kind of like, okay, we know this happens, we know this is a problem, for example, in the South Asian community, or in the specific situation that they portrayed it in. Okay, so now what, like what's your point to the audience, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's like what it was like a little bit missing sometimes. um but I also think there was a lot of other like sort of side stories and dialogues happening. For example, with the housekeeper. I believe she was a housekeeper, and I think they were trying to show her story, and I don't know if they did a great job. It's just my personal opinion of relating it to the main story. Like it was like another story, and it's like, yes, we know this happens. This is terrible. She's also going through something. I get like what they were trying to do. I kind of get what they're trying to do, but I also don't think they did a good job of relating it to like the overall theme and what was happening to the main protagonist. So I think there was some kind of like scattered stories that didn't cohesively fit into the overall story line.
Yeah, no, that certainly makes sense. I think they had a bunch of like different parallels. I think it was a protagonist brother's girlfriend or fiance to like the mother-in-law and the mother herself. There were a lot of parallels, and I did see like all of them had slightly different variations of stories, but it was really helpful to get that perspective. For me, I think it was certainly interesting seeing that, but yeah, it was definitely not as captivating. I was like, okay, maybe this is like climax number one, and I was waiting for climax number two to happen, right? I was like, okay, maybe she's gonna have this big revelation, or like, she's going to take certain action with her life, like, and I'm saying this in such vague terms because I don't want to give the movie away, but yeah, no, cool. Thanks for sharing your thoughts, Sweta.
Yeah, of
Appreciate it.
course. Happy to. And I look forward to, watching many more movies together. And
Yeah, I love
yeah,
this. We should do more of these.
yeah, I'm excited. But yeah, thank you.